Al Jazeera highlighted the protests in their particular, in their articles, including such slogans as "No justice, no peace," "Don't shoot," and "I can't breathe." Not headlines Americans like to hear. America likes to hear about itself, Cal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Let's get into the issues now. Our panel, joining me, Professor Josephine Ross from the Howard University School of Law, Ronald Hampton, National Police Accountability Project, as well as a police veteran of many years here in Washington, D.C., and from Colorado, Captain Tracy Kesey, also a 25-year police veteran and co-founder of the Center for Policing Equity. Welcome to you all. Captain Kesey, I'd like to start with you. It seems as though in the past week, and you and I spoke a little bit about this on email, there's been kind of unwritten rules about police as we see protests around the country, sort of letting protesters air their grievances. Have you been surprised by anything in the past week?
Well, not too surprised. And I wouldn't necessarily say there was unwritten rules, more so than allowing folks the space to express their First Amendment rights. So what you see police doing is what I would consider a progressive training in regards to historically how we used to deal with protesters, and that's providing the space and the place for folks to do that. But again, I think as was highlighted earlier, you still have these issues where you have spouts of violence that are breaking out, and of course that's something I don't think any of the protesters condone as well. So it's not a surprise to see that you have folks that are expressing their First Amendment rights and sending a message to law enforcement nationally that they are not happy with how things are going.
Ronald, how have you been satisfied with the way the police have handled the protests after these incidents?
Well, yes and no. Like Tracy said, there are progressive police leadership that understand what the First Amendment stands for and want people to protest because it helps them when the community is involved in the process of reform and better policing. So, but the ones that in the places where it's taking place, I'm not surprised that peaceful protest is taking place and the police are assisting that process that citizens are allowed through the First Amendment of the Constitution. But in the places where we see violence, we also are beginning to see the results and the product of the militarization of policing when they are bringing out the tanks and the heavy armament and all those kind of things. I think that those situations are going to even prompt the people to be more involved in what's going on and bring more people out because that's part of the issue, the militarization of policing in this country.
Professor, I just want to get your quick views on sort of any surprises that you've had.
Actually, I am surprised because when you think about how few people vote, look at what it takes to go out on the street and demonstrate day after day. I think it shows that the country is turning, or at least a certain segment of the country really wants to do something about this. And as Ron and I were talking about earlier, this is a long-standing problem. And so at what point is it going to get to the boiling point where people feel like they can't get change in any other venue?
And that's what we're going to talk about next. I'm sorry, we have to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about exactly that, some of these potential fixes and where we go from here. We'll be right back.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Music is an essential part of who I am, who my family is, and where I come from. Our show that is jazz-focused is called Beyond Category, and we take a very broad concept of what jazz is, but we look about bringing in the greatest jazz artists working to talk about their music and to hear them play.
Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Cal Perry. Now, after the protests in Ferguson and before what we saw in New York, there was a conversation had in this country about cameras, body cameras. Captain Casey, I'll start with you out in Denver. Do you think this is going to help? Because, of course, critics of these body cameras on police will say, well, look at the video that we saw from New York City. It had no effect there.
Well, I mean, again, body cameras are a tool, much like the in-car cameras that a lot of the departments have. So it's one tool and it's one perspective once you see those tapes of what's going on. But I think my concern, I know the concern of the CPE, is that you cannot rely that these cameras are going to fix what the underlying issues are. It may or may not help in regards to how the interaction happens or what you see post-interaction, even if it results in the use of deadly force. But cameras are expensive. If I remember correctly, the president also, part of his initiative was to make funds available for folks to purchase cameras, which I think is a great idea. But one of the other issues with that is the back-end cost. You have to store that footage. You also have to preserve it for any type of prosecution. So, I mean, there is an added expense to that. But my concern is I don't want folks to think that that is the end-all, be-all, just to have cameras. We have larger issues at work here.
I agree with Tracy, because let me take you back for a minute. I remember when we had a series of incidents that occurred in this country, and we were calling for, or people were calling for, dash cams, cameras in police cars on the dash, and that was going to somehow or another relieve us of police brutality. The fact of the matter was it didn't. And also there were films that the media got a hold of that showed the abuse of police officers, the misuse of citizens by police officers, and also the intention of moving out of the line of sight of the camera so they could do what they wanted to do. The cameras are not and will not be the 100% solution to this. There are a series of other things that must be in place. Tracy mentioned some of them, but we must talk about that, because I don't want a police officer, for example, coming in my house with a camera on because of things like in plain view. I think that that's dangerous, and yet I know that it's a tool, but we got to talk about that, because I don't want to establish a set of expectations that somehow know that this is going to work when it hasn't worked in the past. And we have studies, we have data there that's going to give us some information and insight into what it is that's going on. So let's move carefully. But let's take advantage of the opportunity to do it, but there's some other things that we must do.
I couldn't agree more. The devil is in the details.
Absolutely.
I've been a public defender first, and do a lot of defense work, and trying to get the discovery from the other side. So if it's there and it doesn't help the police, somehow it evaporates, goes away. Yeah. But the one thing that goes the other way is that they have done some studies that say that the police themselves start to self-regulate once the cameras are on. So it does some good, but there are those competing problems.
I think that's an important component, because it puts them front and center. And we know that when you get put front and center, you begin to not only adjust your behavior, but you adjust your mentality. You adjust where you come from and how you deal with people, because you are up front and on the camera. So in that way, that's one of the results of having things like cameras and whatnot, because they become conscious of it. But again, that needs to be a conversation with community people, professionals, and folk like yourself. And folk like Tracy, who've been involved in this in the kind of way that really is going to make a difference in terms of the end product.
That right now they could make a rule that people that film the police as they're beating up somebody should automatically not be prosecuted? There should be some block against that.
Like an amnesty type thing.
Automatic, because you saw what happened with Eric Gardner. Who got
charged? Go ahead, Captain Kesey. I know you're trying to jump in.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's a shame that you have to have a rule to protect someone, again, from, doing what they have the freedom to do. But if we go back just a little bit in regards to when I was speaking to you about the cameras, so there is some self-regulating mechanisms that are in place with that. But that also links back to the broader conversations that's been going on here since not just since Ferguson, but Ron knows for forever. It's the recruiting of the right individuals. Right. So you can put cameras on the most well-meaning folks, but if they don't have what it takes to self-regulate, then we've got, again, even larger issues than just placing cameras on police officers.
This is a fascinating conversation that's going to continue for quite a while, and we want to hear what our audience is saying. Our executive producer, John Walker, is over to take a look at that now. John, what are you hearing?
Thank you, Cal. VOA's coverage of the Michael Brown and Eric Gardner cases sparked a huge debate on voanews.com. To be honest, many comments were very vile and racist, and they're to discuss in this forum. But then there were other readers who left very deliberate and thoughtful comments. Here's a sampling. Jan Sang from Canada writes, "Something is very wrong with the police's use of excessive force. No one of any hue or color should be handled like that by the police." A reader from the U.S. state of Pennsylvania writes, "Cameras will not solve the problem. There are clear cell phone videos of police brutality and murder, and police are not charged with crimes. Still, not all police are arrogant or brutal and feel that they have a license to kill." Godwin from Nigeria writes about the protesters themselves. He says, "The howls of protest about wrong, legally arrived at decisions brings to mind the old Wild West maxim, we're going to give him a fair trial and then we're going to hang him." And that's something that we can ask about criminal justice. And lastly, Chris Vogel from Winnipeg writes, "What is it with the police officers? All that training, maybe selection and recruitment procedures are at fault, and they stupidly kill people for no good reason." Yes, these are opinions from voanews.com, not VOA. Now let's go back to Cal.
We're going to take another short break, and when we get back, we're going to tackle some of those tough issues. Stay with us.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
I wanted to present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
Welcome back to On the Line. Our guest today, as a reminder, via Skype, Captain Tracy Kesey, 25-year veteran of the Denver Police Department, and in studio here, Ronald Hampton, the National Police Accountability Project, and Dr. Josephine Ross from Howard University School of Law. And I would recommend to all of our viewers that you Google our guests. A lot of interesting work going on around the country. I want to pick up sort of where we left off, and Captain Kesey, I'll start with you, as I have been throughout the show. What does success look like? And I know it's a tough question, but is it the absence of violence? How do we know that we're doing a better job?
Well, and that is a tough question, and that's part of what we're examining now through the Center of Policing Equity, is what does the ideal outcome look like in that community-police relationship? In some cases, and I don't think that you will have too much of an argument, you know that at some point the use of deadly force is going to have to be used. I think that is a given for some pieces. But the question is, how do you get there? And then not just how do you get there, but what mechanisms do you put into place to reduce the quick escalation of using the use of deadly force? And so the hard part about doing all of this, everything has to come back on the table now. So we're not just talking about recruiting, retention, and tools. We're talking about policies and procedures and the use of community policing or the community-oriented policing. Because if you all remember, and again, I think Ron remembers, decades ago, this was supposed to be the way that we absolutely begin to fix this problem. And so now we have these issues. But the measurement of what is successful and what is working is something that has been lacking historically. I mean, we certainly have some qualitative data, and we do have definitely some robust scientific research that shows what will work and what work. But the dynamics of this issue of race and policing that is something, again, that the national conversation hasn't even had about, the historical issues and frameworks around race, let alone how does it look when you put that mix together with policing. So it's a hard question. It's going to be a harder road. I mean, it's going to be a hard road trying to come up with what do we do now to begin to fix this. But I think that it's something that you just don't let up on. But you have to have measurable outcomes, but you also have to have an agreement with community and law enforcement as what do we want these outcomes to be. Because right now we know the biggest issue around justice and how is justice defined and how is it achieved is probably one of the integral conversations that's got to occur.
Yeah, so that means that one of the first things we ought to be doing is talking about who is going to be in the conversation, because it has to be a comprehensive and a conversation about inclusion. Everybody has to be involved in that process if we're going to talk about working on the issues that impact on us. And then, too, also, we need to have people like Tracy, like Josephine, who have been involved in this struggle before, because this is not only a new issue. There's two issues here, the shooting of Michael Brown and what happened to Eric Garner. The other issue is that we've been working on police reform and reform of the law enforcement institution in this country and the criminal justice system for an awful long time. We can go back to LEAA, an analysis of the criminal justice system after the rise. We can go back to some of the studies that took place in the Office of Justice programs. I mean, there's a huge body of information out there, and then people like us who were part of that 25, 30-year fight to bring about some changes, and we've seen some evidence of change. But all of a sudden, we've seen a great deal of retreat, too. So in order to not make those same mistakes again, we need to be involved in that process. So it needs to be young people, old people, not too old, not too old, but people who have had the experience and the important experience about it, and then those who have been on the periphery, the researchers, the lawyers, the doctors, everybody who's been involved in this struggle, because this isn't new. And we don't want to make that same mistake. We don't want to be 30 years from now at the same point that we are now again because of some careless act on the part of a civil servant whose job it was to serve people and didn't serve people.
This is bigger than excessive force, though.
It is, absolutely.
What we're really talking about is a change in the way African Americans are viewed in the country. And so instead of them being seen as criminals or potential criminals, we have to change it. And the way to do that is sort of multifold. One is we have this huge mass incarceration. We incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. That has to change. Right. We have two sets of rules, one for police, one for citizens. That has to change, right?
You're right.
And the policing that you're talking about, absolutely. This idea that broken windows is the way to go is just a fallacy. And it's the people in that community that are saying, we do not trust the police. We do not like how we're being treated. Dignity should be given. Like even the story about, get the F out of the road that began the encounter it tells a lot.
You can't talk to people like that. You can't treat people that way and then expect that there's going to be a return in that process. What that does is bring up emotional feelings, and then people act on their feelings. But you brought up broken windows, and that's a sticking point with me. Because when I read Broken Windows, and I was around when all of that happened, 84, 85, and I remember reading Broken Windows, and in reading Broken Windows, I didn't get zero tolerance. I got building a relationship in a community as you work the community, and doing proactive policing allowed us to develop a public safety strategy in a collective way. Now, that's what I've read in Broken Windows.
Well, there was an article that made it seem a little nicer than it is, and it did connect with ComStat, and so it became a little bit more.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
But definitely, it's that whole idea that we have a problem about anything in this country, we've got to prosecute. We got to incarcerate.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
We can't incarcerate ourselves out of the drug problem.
No, you're not.
And we can't incarcerate ourselves out of the problem of the way kids
But
are being abused.
one of the things that has happened, and I think we've seen this a number of times, we can take a theme, and then depends on who read it and under what circumstances they read it. It doesn't mean the same to everybody. Exactly. And so in law enforcement, we do that an awful lot.
Let me jump in. I'm sorry. I'm standing up for Captain Kesey, who can't physically be here in the studio. Captain, please jump in. Go ahead.
That's the advantage of not being in the studio. But, both, are absolutely on point. So when you're talking about, and I hear these things, community policing was sort of tying into CompStat, when you make the assumption that law enforcement nationally is all on the same page with different things, right, that's a huge problem. It's a big fallacy. And I think that what we talk about, not just community policing, but broken windows, all of these implemented in different ways, and which I think was very appropriate for the community. So to make the assumption that it was going to look the same, in LA versus Oakland versus DC, I think would have created a whole bunch of problems. But I think as Ron pointed out, for those of us who go that far back, and Ron, I'll even take you back, you remember Weed and Seed, under that same concept. Right. What I think is happening here is that sometimes in law enforcement, we are a group of folks that change doesn't bode well for us because we bank on change. We don't bank on change. We bank on those things being static because we perceive those as protecting ourselves, and that's how we survive, by the known, what we know as far as our training. But one of the things that's going to be critical over the next 5 to 10 years is how police leadership deals with this issue. Because a lot of times that means you might have to go back on what you originally thought was going to work and be honest with the community and say, this has created the problem, or this is a portion of that problem. So let's sit down and re-examine. And that's what was, Ron mentioned this at the beginning of the show. This is where progressive leadership comes in, right? So the ability to sit down and say, everything is on the table. Not only is broken windows, not only is, enforcing low-level, city ordinances.
Captain Kesey, I'm sorry. Captain Kesey, I'm sorry to cut you off. We are out of time. This is exactly the discussion that I was hoping to have. And I want to remind our viewers, 1 week from today, right now, right here, we're going to have a 1-hour special on exactly this issue. I want to thank my entire panel. Josephine Ross, professor from Howard University School of Law, the work that you do in New Orleans. I hope people will check that out on Google. Sir, thank you very much. Ronald Hampton, National Police Accountability Project, and via Skype from Denver. Captain Kesey, thank you very much. To John Walker, to our reporter in New York, to all of our audience, thank you very much.